Welcome to Cinevantage. This year, cinema is offering something genuinely exciting. A lineup built around sequels people have been waiting years for, original concepts with real ambition, and franchise entries that seem to understand what made fans fall in love in the first place. We have mythological epics shot on IMAX, dystopian prequels, psychological horror adaptations, sci-fi survival stories, superhero reinventions, and at least one film that might be the most emotionally anticipated theatrical event in the last decade. 12 films, every one of them worth your attention. But before we start the video, it would help me enormously if you took a moment to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for your kind support. Number 12. The Odyssey. Christopher Nolan has spent his career reinventing genres, and now he turns his lens on the oldest story ever told. The Odyssey adapts Homer's ancient myth as a massive IMAX spectacle, following Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, a warrior trying to find his way home after the Trojan War. What should be a journey becomes a 10-year nightmare. Gods interfere, monsters appear, a cyclops, sirens, the sorceress, Circe. Every step forward costs something. But the film is less about the obstacles and more about what they do to a man. Odysseus doesn't just endure the journey, he's broken by it, rebuilt by it, and forced to question who he is by the time any shore appears. Nolan shoots the whole thing with IMAX cameras, building a world that feels genuinely enormous, ancient and mythological, but also visceral and grounded. The premise alone earns it a spot on this list. Whether the execution matches the ambition is the only real question, but if anyone can make a 2-hour-plus Greek epic feel essential for the big screen, it's Nolan. Number 11. Sunrise on the Reaping. If you thought the Hunger Games universe had shown you its worst, think again. Sunrise on the Reaping goes back 24 years before Katniss ever stepped into an arena, to the 50th Hunger Games, the infamous Quarter Quell. This is where a young Haymitch Abernathy's story begins, long before audiences knew him as the cynical, hollow mentor of later films. The Capitol at its most ruthless, the Games at their most politically calculated. This isn't a prequel that softens the world, it sharpens it. The film drops the audience into the reaping itself, letting the machinery of control unfold in real time. The spectacle, the manipulation, the cold efficiency of a system designed not just to kill, but to remind everyone who holds the power. What makes this compelling is watching Haymitch, before he became who he is, still human, still hoping, still breakable. His arc explains everything about the bitter, detached mentor audiences met in the original trilogy. For fans of the franchise, this is essential. For newcomers, it works as a standalone story about survival, propaganda, and the cost of resistance. Number 10. The Devil Wears Prada 2. Almost 20 years after the original became a cultural phenomenon, Miranda Priestly is back, and the world she ruled has moved on without her. The Devil Wears Prada 2 isn't just a nostalgia trip. The industry it returns to looks completely different. Print media has collapsed. Digital creators set the trends. Luxury conglomerates have restructured the entire power landscape. Authority, taste, and relevance no longer belong to the same people they once did. Miranda, still played by Meryl Streep, finds herself in unfamiliar territory, not because she's lost her edge, but because the game itself has changed. The question the film asks is whether someone who built an empire on absolute control can adapt when control is no longer enough. The original worked because it was sharp about fashion as a system of power, not just aesthetics. The sequel seems to understand that the same critique applies just as well to the digital age influencer culture, algorithm-driven relevance, and the collapse of old hierarchies. Whether it recaptures the wit of the first film remains to be seen, but the premise is rich enough that it doesn't need to coast on nostalgia. Number 9. Return to Silent Hill. The original Silent Hill games are some of the most psychologically disturbing horror ever made, and this adaptation finally takes that seriously. Return to Silent Hill is a direct adaptation of Silent Hill 2, functioning as a standalone film rather than a sequel to the 2006 movie. It follows James Sunderland, a man destroyed by grief who receives a letter from his dead wife, pulling him back to the fog-covered town where she died. What he finds there isn't just abandonment and decay. Silent Hill reflects James back at himself. The monsters he encounters, the environments he moves through, the horrors that pursue him, they're not random. They're made of his guilt, his repressed memories, his grief twisted into something that wants to punish him. That's what separates this story from standard survival horror. The town isn't just dangerous, it's personal. Every creature, every distorted space is a manifestation of what James has refused to face. The film commits to that psychological architecture rather than just delivering jump scares. It's uncomfortable, deliberate, and genuinely unsettling. For horror fans who've wanted to see the game's emotional complexity translated to the screen, this is the closest it's gotten. Number 8. Mortal Kombat 2. The first Mortal Kombat reboot had fun with the lore but felt contained. The sequel goes much bigger and leans fully into everything that made the franchise iconic. Mortal Kombat 2 picks up after the events of the first film, but the stakes have expanded from individual combat to the fate of Earthrealm itself. The legendary warlord Shao Kahn arrives as the dominant threat, and his conquest isn't a distant possibility, it's already in motion. Heroes and rivals are forced into uncomfortable alliances. The action moves across multiple mystical realms. The fight choreography is more ambitious, the violence more deliberately over the top in the way fans of the games have always wanted. The film also delivers on one of the most anticipated introductions in the entire franchise. Johnny Cage finally arrives. For anyone who grew up with the games, that alone is a significant moment. Where the first film spent time establishing the world, this one gets to inhabit it. The mythology is richer, the roster is larger, and the tone commits to the gleeful brutality that is, honestly, the whole point. It's not trying to be more than it is, and that's precisely why it works. Number 7. Project Hail Mary. Imagine waking up alone on a broken spacecraft with no memory of who you are or why you're there. That's where Project Hail Mary begins, and the film never fully lets you exhale after that opening. Ryan Grace, played by Ryan Gosling, pieces together his identity through fragmented memories while coming to terms with a staggering reality. He's been sent on a one-way mission to the Tau Ceti system as humanity's last attempt to prevent an extinction-level threat. What makes this stand out from typical sci-fi spectacle is the texture of it. The story is built around hard science, problem-solving, and the particular kind of determination that comes when failure isn't an option. Every decision carries the weight of an entire planet. The isolation is real, the stakes are existential, and yet the emotional core of the story is surprisingly intimate. The film is based on Andy Weir's novel, the same author behind The Martian, and shares that book's commitment to making science feel thrilling rather than dry. Gosling has the range to carry a film like this, and the premise demands exactly that, a single performance holding together everything around it. The premise is solid. The execution will determine whether this becomes one of the great sci-fi films of the decade. Number 6. Street Fighter. After decades of failed adaptations, Street Fighter finally gets the treatment it deserves, a hard-hitting, character-driven action film that respects the source material. Set in 1993, the story centers on estranged fighters Ryu and Ken Masters, played by Andrew Koji and Noah Centineo, who are brought back together when Chun-Li recruits them for the World Warrior Tournament. What starts as a classic martial arts showdown reveals something darker underneath. A conspiracy buried within the tournament's structure turns personal rivalries into something with global consequences, which is exactly the kind of escalation the franchise has always been built around. The film leans into the character dynamics fans know, Ryu's singular, almost monk-like dedication to the fight, Ken's flashier energy, and the different philosophy each brings to combat. The tension between them is the emotional engine of the story. The action choreography is designed for impact martial arts sequences that feel like they were built around the specific movesets of each character rather than generic Hollywood fights. It's been a long wait for a Street Fighter adaptation that actually works. Based on everything known, this one finally understands what made people love the games in the first place. Number 5. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. This is not the Supergirl you know from the television series. The Kara Zor-El of Woman of Tomorrow is hardened, battle-worn, and driven by something much darker than hope. Unlike Superman, who grew up safe on Earth, Kara survived Krypton's destruction and spent years enduring an unforgiving universe before finding any kind of stability. That history shows. Directed by Craig Gillespie under James Gunn's DC Universe reboot, the film follows Kara on a journey across the galaxy alongside Ruthie, a young woman seeking justice for her father's murder. Their stories intertwine, and together they're drawn into something much larger than either expected. The film commits to space fantasy with strong emotional weight. Kara isn't a symbol of purity here, she's a figure of power, wrestling with trauma, identity, and the question of what heroism even means when you've had to fight for everything. The tone is deliberately different from the rest of the DCU, grittier, more cosmic, with a female lead whose complexity is the point. Millie Alcock takes on the role, and the premise gives her enormous room to work with. The premise is solid. Whether the execution matches its ambition will define where this falls in the larger DC project. Number 4. Peaky Blinders, The Immortal Man. Tommy Shelby has always been a man haunted by the wars he survived, and now the biggest war of all has arrived. The Immortal Man brings the Peaky Blinders saga to the big screen, set in Birmingham in 1940 as the Second World War transforms the world around the Shelby family. Tommy, again played by Cillian Murphy, emerges from self-imposed exile as old enemies resurface and political pressure mounts from every direction. The television series spent 6 seasons building one of the most complex characters in British drama, a man simultaneously capable of enormous strategic brilliance and profound self-destruction. The film inherits all of that weight. What makes this transition to cinema compelling isn't the scale, though that's obviously expanded. It's the question the story has always been circling. Can a man like Tommy Shelby survive peace as well as he survived war? The backdrop of the Blitz adds urgency. The personal stakes, family legacy, psychological damage, enemies who know exactly how to hit him add intimacy. Stephen Knight writes the screenplay as he always has, which means the dialogue will be precise, the violence will be purposeful, and the emotional devastation will arrive without warning. Peaky Blinders fans have been waiting for this. It looks worth the wait. Number 3. Disclosure Day. Steven Spielberg returning to large-scale science fiction focused on first contact is arguably the most significant creative event in this entire list. Disclosure Day imagines a world on the verge of confirmed extraterrestrial contact. Not the aftermath, not the invasion. The moment just before everything changes, when the evidence is fragmentary, the governments are scrambling, and ordinary people are confronted with a reality they can barely process. What Spielberg has always done better than anyone is locate the human story inside the cosmic one. Close Encounters wasn't about UFOs, it was about obsession and family fracture. E.T. wasn't about aliens, it was about loneliness and belonging. Disclosure Day appears to follow that same instinct. The film focuses on the human response, fear, wonder, chaos, and the institutional panic of governments trying to control a narrative that has already escaped them. Spielberg frames this through modern anxieties, trust in institutions, information overload, collective panic in an era of fractured media. The result is a sci-fi film that feels genuinely contemporary rather than nostalgic. The premise is rich. The director is unmatched at this specific intersection of spectacle and emotional honesty, and the subject matter has never been more culturally loaded. This is the one to watch. Number 2. Greenland. Migration. The first Greenland was one of the best disaster films in years, not because of its scale, but because of its focus. While every other film in the genre was destroying landmarks and cutting between world leaders in bunkers, Greenland stayed with one family. Their panic, their choices, their cost. Migration picks up years after the Comet Clark devastated Earth. The Garrity family, John and Allison, played by Gerard Butler and Morena Baccarin, emerge from their underground bunker with their teenage son to find a civilization in ruins. Much of Europe is frozen and fractured. What was once habitable has become treacherous. The film shifts its focus from the disaster itself to the long aftermath, survival, migration, and the question of whether humanity can rebuild anything worth having. The journey they undertake across destroyed landscapes is physically brutal and emotionally exhausting, which is exactly the tone this story needs. Where the first film asked whether a family could reach safety, this one asks what happens when safety turns out to be just another starting point. The premise goes deeper than the original, demanding more from its characters and more from its audience. Butler has proven he carries this material well. If the script matches the ambition, Migration could be the rare sequel that improves on its predecessor. Number 1. The Mandalorian and Grogu. Of everything on this list, The Mandalorian and Grogu has the clearest path to being the biggest film of the year and the most emotionally loaded. Din Djarin and Grogu began as a television story built on silence, restraint, and a bond told more through glances than dialogue. 3 seasons of The Mandalorian established something rare, a relationship between 2 characters that an enormous audience genuinely cares about. Moving that story to the big screen isn't just a format change, it's a statement. The film picks up in the post-Imperial galaxy, where the New Republic recruits Din and Grogu to hunt down remnants of Imperial warlords destabilizing regions still recovering from the Empire's fall. What starts as another mission at the edges of the galaxy gradually expands into something with much larger consequences, positioning both characters as central figures in the shape of the post-Imperial future. The theatrical canvas allows for a scale of action and world-building that streaming never fully permitted. Whole planets, enormous set pieces, and the kind of visual storytelling that demands a cinema screen. But at the center of it is the same thing that made the show work: the relationship between a warrior who believes in a strict, lonely code and a small creature who made him reconsider everything. That's why this is number one. The spectacle will deliver. The emotional core already exists. That's the list. 12 films that make 2026 one of the most interesting years for cinema in a long time. From Nolan's Greek epic to a Mandalorian story finally reaching the big screen, there's something here for every kind of audience. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Which of these are you most excited for? Let us know in the comments. Every title on this list has something worth anticipating, but only a few will actually deliver on the promise. We'll find out soon enough.